My name is Larry C. Johnson. You know, when people start talking about this stuff, it's clear that they really have no idea what they're getting into. They don't understand the realities of what's happening or where this could lead. The concept of introducing a no-fly zone over Ukraine, that's not just a strategic move. It's asking for World War III. Let's be honest, if NATO decides to impose that, it's not going to be some controlled, neat airstrike. It's going to escalate immediately and fast. If a missile flies toward Russia, especially Moscow, there's no hesitation. Russia's nuclear doctrine kicks in. If it's a missile, it could be carrying a nuclear warhead. Russia would retaliate with full force. We're talking about a full-scale nuclear war. Not just one or two rockets, this would be an all-out volley. And that's the last thing anyone wants. These people talking about a no-fly zone, they are absolute fools. They don't understand the consequences of what they're suggesting. The reality is Russia cannot back down from this. It's an existential crisis for them. If they back off, they're done as a country. And that's the truth. It's like if the Soviet Union had invaded Texas, would the U.S. back down? Absolutely not. They'd go to nuclear war to protect their borders. So we're at a point where things can get out of control very quickly. Russia's nuclear capabilities are real. There are systems in place to ensure retaliation, and even if someone tries to take out key positions, the dead hand mechanism would activate. It's a fail-safe that launches missiles across the country in the event of a decapitation strike. Look, it's simple. You destroy the key infrastructure, certain cities, and everything collapses. You don't need to wipe out an entire country. You just need to hit the right targets, and that's it. That's how fragile these modern nations are. We're talking about a system that's incredibly volatile. Any of these reckless moves can trigger something catastrophic. And you know what? That's why people like this John Sweat guy need to be shut down. They're playing with fire. They have no clue what they're suggesting. I'm glad to be able to talk about this. It's important that we understand what's really going on here, that we see the bigger picture. Because once things escalate, there's no turning back. And that's something people need to take seriously. We all have to remember that we're dealing with lives here, and this is no game. The risk of nuclear escalation isn't something to be taken lightly, and if NATO continues down this path, it's going to lead to something we'll all regret. This keeps the original tone intact with the directness and urgency of the message. Let me know if you need any further changes. What happened to Donald Trump and his policies in Central Asia? He's talking about regaining control of the heart of the country in Central Asia. It's true, but what do you think is actually happening? He mentions investments in Uzbekistan worth $35 billion and talks about Kazakhstan as well. There's even talk about possibly returning a military base to these countries. What do I think about the importance of Central Asia? Trump says that American companies should invest in wolfram and rare earth metals. Kazakhstan has a lot of tungsten reserves, and America is looking to replace China as the supplier of tungsten. This is Trump's dream, almost an obsession with rare earth metals. But I don't think Kazakhstan could become a major supplier of rare earth metals. American oil companies have invested heavily in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, and that turned into a disaster. It was called ecocide. The oil workers' unions rebelled and fought against it. In Central Asia, there's a strong anti-American sentiment, especially when it comes to American mining and oil companies. This is what Trump will have to face. He hopes the funding won't come from the U.S. government, but rather from the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Exactly. They introduced neoliberalism to Kazakhstan and Central Asia, and that turned into a disaster. What happened in Central Asia is much like what happened in the Baltics. Local kleptocracies took over registered properties in their names, made deals with Western companies for bribes, and kept their money in the West. They took all the best housing. The IMF and World Bank brought in the rule of law, which allowed governments to strip debtors of their rights to redeem homes purchased on credit. Microloans became the main tool for this, and it mainly affected women who were socially pressured to repay their debts. The suicide rate increased, and women ended up leading the opposition to Western influence in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and other countries. The initial reaction to the Soviet Union was changed to a general opinion that things were much better before. There was no such polarization, and there was no class of billionaires as we see today in these countries. The nepotism of rulers toward their families became rampant. It's like we're back in the 19th century. So now we're talking about minerals. Yes, in the 19th century, it was about harvests, opium, and similar things. This is just a repetition of what was once called the Great Game or the Eastern Question in Great Britain, the long struggle between Britain and Russia, and now between the US and Russia for control over everything from Iran to Central Asia and the Uyghur regions of Western China. This is the geopolitical game in which mining companies participate, and mining companies are probably the most unpopular in the region. So we haven't heard much about what China and Russia are doing. I guess they're just letting America play its cards. But last week, Kazakhstan's foreign minister was in Washington trying to present Kazakhstan as a country you can make deals with. It looks like the current government is trying to make a bargain, and I think they met with U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, who used to negotiate with Kazakhstan Railways. Now there's an offer from the Caucasus Foundation to invest in the mining industry, along with a profit-sharing agreement with Kazakhstan. However, after paying all interest, management, and other expenses, there might not be much profit left. So there's a big game going on now between neoliberal mining companies and what Kazakhstanis call ecocide, the environmental destruction caused by pollution and oil spills, which suits oil companies. Meanwhile, China's One Belt, One Road initiative offers completely different terms and a different philosophy separate from neoliberalism. So it's not just a geopolitical game, it's also an economic one. Will it be more socialist agreements or neoliberal ones? The US is now trying to promote neoliberalism. You know, the whole idea of bombing boats and calling it fighting drug trafficking is just absurd. These boats are tiny and the journey is long. If they're really trafficking drugs, they need to refuel several times along the way. Where's the gas? What are we even talking about here? The idea that we can just blow up boats and claim we know what's on them is a joke. It's a sad excuse for foreign policy, and frankly, it's dangerous. I mean, this is exactly what's wrong with the mindset of those running the country. There's this constant narrative that the United States can just kill anyone, anytime, without proper evidence. It's been like that for years, and it's horrifying. Just because we say someone's a bad actor doesn't mean we should have the right to destroy their lives, their country, or even their families. Look at World War II, sure. We dropped bombs on Germany and Japan, but at what cost? We killed millions of civilians, and we justify it as necessary. But the Soviets didn't have that mentality. They didn't engage in those kinds of aerial bombardments. It wasn't in their DNA. They fought differently. The US, on the other hand, seems to think it's okay to take lives without even batting an eye. And it's this mentality that is causing so much destruction in the world today. The worst part of it all, we've learned nothing from the past. We've been at war after war after war, and every time we do the same thing. We kill civilians, we destabilize regions, and we call it mission accomplished. But what have we really accomplished? More suffering, more hatred, and more people who want to fight back. The cycle continues. And let's talk about Venezuela for a minute. People in the West still seem to think that Venezuela is this easy target for invasion. The U.S. thinks it can just waltz in, topple Maduro, and take control. But the reality is far more complicated. You've got the geography of Venezuela to deal with. If they try to invade, they've got to get through mountains, deal with tough terrain, and face an armed population that's not going to just roll over. The U.S. is already offshore with Marines and amphibious ships, but trying to take Caracas is no small task. It's not like just landing on a beach and marching in. They'd face ambushes all the way up to the capital, and Venezuelans are ready to defend their home. They're not going to give up easily. Sure, the U.S. might try to use airstrikes like they always do, but that's not going to be enough to take down the Venezuelan government. They've got the militia, they've got a trained military, and they've got support from Russia and China. This isn't a quick operation like Iraq or Libya. It's a war with real stakes, and the U.S. isn't ready for that. And let's not forget the lies about drug trafficking. The idea that Venezuela is somehow the primary source of drugs in the U.S. is ridiculous. Most of the drugs are coming from Colombia, not Venezuela. But the U.S. likes to create these narratives to justify its interventions, and it's working because now we're in a situation where war is on the table again. And then you look at the broader geopolitical picture. The U.S. isn't just playing with Venezuela, it's trying to push its agenda in multiple regions. You've got Israel, which, despite all its power and military might, is still struggling to maintain control. The U.S. wants to keep its alliances strong, but it's clear that countries like Russia and China are beginning to shift the balance of power. They're not sitting back waiting for the U.S. to make its move. They're actively engaging, and they're not afraid to stand up to the West. The question now is what happens next? The U.S. is stretching itself thin, trying to maintain control over all these different areas, but the world is changing. We've seen countries like India and China start making deals that don't involve the dollar, which means the U.S. is losing its grip on the global financial system. This is just the beginning. If the U.S. doesn't adjust, it could find itself outpaced by countries that are willing to play the game differently. It's funny how the media and politicians like to frame everything as good versus evil, but when you dig deeper, it's clear that the U.S. is often just another player in the game doing whatever it can to hold on to power. The problem is this game comes at a cost, the cost of human lives, the cost of entire nations being destabilized, and the cost of the future. It's time for a serious reckoning, and I think it's coming. Whether we like it or not, the world is changing, and we need to start thinking about how we engage with that change, not just continue to push forward as if we can control everything. Because the more we try to control, the more we risk losing. And as for the future, who knows? But one thing's clear, what's happening in Venezuela, Ukraine, the Middle East, and elsewhere is part of a bigger picture, a picture where the U.S. is no longer the undisputed leader, and that's something we need to face. But I have a feeling that as long as the U.S. keeps thinking it can do whatever it wants, it's going to keep running into walls. And one day, it might just be too late to turn back. Well, we're clearly at a critical juncture in world affairs. But as I see it, the off-ramps, they're not on the table, at least not for now. In Ukraine, Russia's position is hardening. They're not backing down. It's clear Odessa will likely fall and Ukrainian forces will get pushed back to the western side of the Dnieper River. This is not a momentary hiccup. It's a long-term strategy playing out. The Russian military is not running out of steam anytime soon. The reality for Ukraine is that they are running out of manpower and resources. The West, particularly the U.S., has been propping them up for months now, but there's only so much they can do. And let's be honest, no one wants to keep pumping endless amounts of money into this conflict, especially when they're not seeing a return on that investment. The Ukrainian government can't replace what's being lost, and the longer this drags on, the more untenable the situation becomes for them. The question is whether the West will continue supporting them with military aid, but honestly, I don't see how they can sustain this much longer. Once the public sentiment in the U.S. and Europe shifts, and it will, the support will wane. The money will stop flowing, and the war will grind to a halt. As for Israel, it's a similar story. The conflict in Gaza isn't going anywhere, and neither side is willing to make the kind of concessions that would lead to peace. Israel wants to expand, And the Palestinians, well, they've got a different vision. The Zionist settlers won't stop, and Hamas isn't about to disarm. There's no easy path forward. And without real pressure on both sides, it's going to keep spiraling into more violence, more bloodshed. The fact that the U.S. isn't taking a stronger stand to push Israel to the table for a real peace deal is a tragedy. The U.S. is too entangled with its interests in the region to act as a true peacemaker. And as long as Israel can keep getting away with it, they will. It's a situation that's ripe for further escalation, and I don't see anyone stepping up to stop it anytime soon. Now, turning back to Venezuela, things aren't looking much better. It's the same old story of U.S. intervention and regime change. The idea that the U.S. could just roll in, take Caracas, and install a new government is laughable. The terrain is tough, the Venezuelans are ready to fight, and the Russian and Chinese support makes a full invasion far more complicated than it might have seemed on paper. But we've seen this playbook before. The U.S. loves to send its military wherever it can. However, it's a different ballgame when the stakes are high and the opposition is prepared. Venezuela has strong military leadership, and the people are resilient. It's not going to be a quick win for anyone. And Trump, well, his rhetoric has been all over the place. One day he's talking about negotiations. The next he's sending warships to Venezuela. I get the sense that he's trying to project strength, but at the same time, he knows that if he pushes too far, he risks alienating important allies. He's stuck in a position where he's trying to please multiple sides, and it's clear he's not going to win this one easily. The world is watching, and at some point, that pressure is going to mount. To your point about Trump and his foreign policy moves, the reality is that he's facing a tough decision. How does he position himself as a strong leader while also avoiding unnecessary wars? The answer isn't simple, and there's no clear off-ramp in sight. The situation in Gaza, Ukraine, and Venezuela is too complex, and the leverage the U.S. once had is quickly eroding. Even with Trump's influence, it's becoming increasingly difficult to see how the U.S. can pull itself out of this global quagmire without serious consequences. But as always, I'll keep an eye on Moscow. There's a lot happening here that doesn't get the attention it deserves. I'll be meeting with business leaders, military officials, and politicians, but I won't be going out much. The streets are busy, the discussions are intense, and the future is uncertain. But rest assured, Russia's position is clear. They won't back down, and they have a long-term strategy in mind. As for the West, well, I don't think they understand the full weight of what's coming. They're too focused on short-term wins and haven't considered the long-term costs. This game is far from over, and the stakes couldn't be higher. But one thing's for sure, it's going to be a bumpy ride when it comes to intelligence sharing between Russia, Iran, and China. It's clear that the cooperation is growing significantly. Over the last few years, especially since the onset of the special military operation in Ukraine, Russia and China have seen their relationship evolve into something far deeper than before. Initially, there wasn't a lot of open collaboration between them, but the situation has drastically changed since 2023. Putin and Xi Jinping have come to understand the existential threat posed by the West. They're no longer just playing defense, they're collaborating strategically. Russia, China, and Iran are aligning their efforts, especially in terms of countering NATO and US military influence. Their ability to share intelligence is becoming a critical component of this new axis. This isn't just political posturing, it's about survival. And in that, they are very much in sync. The relationship between Russia and China has reached a point where they are not just talking about economic cooperation, but are also aligning their military strategies. The exchange of military intelligence particularly related to air defense systems, has been hugely beneficial to both sides. Russia's experience in Ukraine, where they've been primarily engaged against NATO forces, has given them invaluable knowledge about US and NATO defense systems. Likewise, Iran, which has had a long-standing conflict with Israel, has valuable expertise regarding air defense strategies that can be integrated into Russia and China's broader military calculus. China has increasingly recognized the need to ally with Russia, especially in the face of mounting pressure from the West. Both countries understand that they can no longer afford to operate separately. They're in a strategic alliance where their combined resources, military knowledge, and geopolitical positioning give them a much stronger bargaining position on the global stage. This growing partnership between Russia, China, and Iran is something the West has failed to fully comprehend. It's not just about opposing the West in the geopolitical arena, but rather it's about the creation of a new international order, one where the influence of the West is gradually being reduced. While they'd prefer not to engage in direct conflict, Russia and China have come to realize that they have no other choice but to prepare for a prolonged standoff. They have a shared interest in breaking free from the Western-dominated financial and political systems, and that requires both military and intelligence cooperation. As for the intelligence sharing specifically, you can bet that Russia is learning from China's cyber capabilities, while China is benefiting from Russia's missile defense and battlefield experience. This exchange is about positioning themselves as a united front, able to counter NATO's technological and military advancements. And Iran, with its experience in asymmetric warfare and its growing ties with both Russia and China, is adding a unique dimension to this cooperation. These three nations are slowly but surely becoming a formidable force, and the U.S. is going to have to reckon with that. The real question now is, how far will this cooperation go? And will the West recognize this growing alliance in time to adapt its strategies? We're witnessing a fundamental shift in global power dynamics. The U.S. and its allies can no longer afford to ignore the fact that Russia, China, and Iran are banding together. And if they do, they risk finding themselves at a severe disadvantage in the coming years. In conclusion, the United States is increasingly being isolated. As Russia, China, and Iran strengthen their cooperation, they are setting the stage for a multipolar world, one where the West no longer holds the monopoly on global influence. The coming years will likely see the Western powers scrambling to adjust to this new reality. However, with the way things are shaping up, it looks like a new geopolitical landscape is already being carved out, and the U.S. might not be able to stop it.